Chapter 47. Secret Meeting in the Warehouse. It was late, 9 o'clock. Inside Jimmy's temporary warehouse, the dim lights cast a shadow over the faces of more than 20 people gathered around a stove in the middle of the room, their expressions tense and anxious. Some smoked silently, not uttering a word. The atmosphere in the warehouse was extremely heavy. "Jimmy, when is this Hiroshi you mentioned going to arrive?" Finally, someone spoke up. "We've been waiting for him for nearly 2 hours now. Isn't he being a bit too arrogant?" "Yeah, just a little brat, barely grown up, and he thinks he can take on those crazy bandits. Isn't that just wishful thinking?" "Jimmy, we all came here because of you. This kid is really unreliable." Perhaps because they had waited too long, or because many of them had been robbed before, leaving them bitter and resentful, complaints began to surface. Some were even preparing to leave. "Let's give him a little more time. Boss Hiroshi's farm is quite far from here, especially at night. He might have been delayed on the way. Let's be patient." Jimmy wiped the sweat from his forehead, trying to calm everyone down. Since leaving Hiroshi's farm earlier that day, Jimmy had visited every town nearby. The gang that had been robbing food supplies had been particularly active recently, and it was easy to find out who the victims were. In the past 10 days, more than 50 households had fallen victim to this gang, mostly restaurants or supermarkets, their food supplies completely looted. A few unfortunate ones had been shot and wounded. 2 had bled to death on the way to the hospital without receiving treatment. Upon hearing about so many victims, Jimmy realized the situation was serious. He had thought it would be easy to gather enough people, but he was disappointed. When these victims heard Jimmy's intentions, some slammed their doors shut, while others cursed at him. Jimmy had almost gotten into a fight with them right then and there. Later, Jimmy understood. They were all terrified of these food-robbing gangs and dared not resist for fear of retaliation. So Jimmy spent the whole day in nearby towns before finally persuading these 24 people to come. Some of them were Jimmy's acquaintances who hadn't wanted to come but had to show up because of him. But now, after waiting for 2 hours and still no sign of Hiroshi, they could no longer contain their impatience. They began to shout that they were leaving, not willing to stay and watch Jimmy lose his mind. "Even the military and police can't handle them. What can a little brat do? I must be stupid for waiting here for 2 hours." A middle-aged man in his 40s sneered and glared at the others. "If you still want to waste time, go ahead. I'm not playing along anymore. I'm going home. I knew from the start this was a bad idea. Let's go, let's go." Led by the middle-aged man, the 20 in the warehouse started to get up, preparing to leave. Just then, the sound of a motorcycle approached outside the warehouse. Soon after, the warehouse door was pushed open from the outside. A young man walked in, leading a delicate and pretty young girl. He looked around and smiled. "Let me introduce myself. I'm Hiroshi. It was me who asked Jimmy to gather you all here tonight." Those who were about to step out of the warehouse froze at his words, their eyes fixed on Hiroshi. "You're the one who said you can lead us to get revenge?" The middle-aged man frowned and asked, "What makes us believe in you?" When Jimmy had approached them earlier, he hadn't mentioned that Hiroshi was armed. After all, with so many people involved, there was a risk of the information leaking prematurely. "Yeah, what makes you think we should trust you? With your small arms and legs, you'll probably collapse with a gust of wind blowing on you, won't you? You can't even handle me. How are you going to deal with those thugs who are armed?" For a moment, tension rose sharply in the warehouse, and everyone began to question Hiroshi directly. Hiroshi took a deep breath, glanced at everyone, and suddenly smiled. "What makes you believe? How about this?" Hiroshi suddenly lifted his leg and kicked a stone millstone that was placed near the warehouse door. With a loud bang, the 8-kilogram millstone was kicked 3 meters away by Hiroshi, landing heavily on the ground and cracking in the middle. Silence. The warehouse fell into silence. Everyone who witnessed this scene was stunned. Even Jimmy was on the verge of popping his eyeballs out. Jimmy knew very well how heavy that millstone was. Even moving it a little required him to exert all his strength. But Hiroshi just kicked it away like it was nothing, and even cracked it. Most importantly, his expression didn't even suggest he had exerted much effort. My God, what is Hiroshi made of? Steel? For a long time, the warehouse was silent. Only the sound of swallowing saliva could be heard. After a while, someone tremblingly asked, "Mr. Hiroshi, I admit you're indeed strong, but those guys have guns. Even if you're so powerful, can you withstand firearms?" At these words, the morale that had risen due to Hiroshi's display of terrifying strength began to sink again. This was an era of technology. Even the world's top martial artists couldn't withstand an attack from an ordinary person with a gun. "Are you talking about these guns?" Hiroshi spoke, and suddenly a thunderous sound like an explosion rang out in the warehouse. In the distance, a bucket shattered. In Hiroshi's hand, a revolver was still emitting wisps of white smoke. At this moment, no one doubted Hiroshi's strength anymore. With such formidable skills and state-of-the-art weapons, Hiroshi was definitely qualified to take down those thugs. The chaos that had been brewing in the warehouse before Hiroshi arrived was resolved in less than a minute after he showed up. "Mr. Hiroshi, those are a group of thugs. What if we get injured or killed in the fight?" someone asked with concern. Hiroshi frowned at the question, then looked around and said in a deep voice, "After your food supplies are looted, how long can you hold on? Between starving to death and fighting to the death, which one do you choose?" To fight to the death meant there was still a chance of survival. To be timid meant a certain death. Silence fell among the crowd. After a long silence, someone finally gritted their teeth and said, "All right, count me in. These bastards stole all my savings and seriously injured my father. If I don't get revenge, I'm not a man. I'm in too. Count me in. These people are like locusts that can never be satisfied. They've taken away our food, our hope of survival. We must get revenge and reclaim what is rightfully ours." Seeing this scene, Hiroshi smiled faintly. "Good. But to succeed, you must all follow my plan. Before we start the plan, I'll ask again. Anyone else wants to withdraw? If so, speak up now. Once the plan starts, if you don't follow orders or retreat midway, don't blame me for turning hostile.